we only have about 10 to 15 more minutes to address the questions. Any more questions from the floor? Yeah, Pak.
Thank you.
The gentleman in glasses in the middle.
Can I take on the floor? Thank you very much. I think, let me introduce myself. I'm engineer M.A. Jabbar. I'm from Pakistan. I'm from the private sector, but equally also representing some of the public sector organization where private sector is giving representation to speak for the, I must say, for private sector. Now, the discussion overall I see is going on between the good and bad investment and between a thesis that SMEs should be supported and between an antithesis that they are riskful, so the commercial banks should be very much careful. I personally agree and believe that banks are like profit-making destinations, and if I talk about my country, the most profitable sector in Pakistan is banking. When they make profits, the others are also not making that much profit. Having said so, I think I would just like to say that SMEs appear to be like children on whom parents must make investment. That investment is riskful also. He becomes a good HR to support the economy in the future, or probably he needs to be tamed and continues to be tuned so that he improves, you see. Having said so, I think among all the speakers, I find Asian Development Bank as the most important, you see, venue which is looking into all these aspects of developmental economics. Okay. So my questions would relate and would refer to Madam Lakshmi. That Madam Lakshmi, you just referred to a successful example of South Korea and Singapore where labor-intensive transform into knowledge-based. You're right. But in most of the Asian countries, the SMEs are labor-intensive and they should continue to be supported because, for example, in my country, 30% of the SMEs, they provide 73% of the employment. And so elsewhere, similar pattern is existing. So I think Asian Development Bank should not be influenced by this example. They should continue to support the SMEs in a specific labor-intensive in Asia where they require jobs.
Okay, we get the question. So, Ms. Lakshmi, what do you think? Will Asian Development Bank be the parents of SMEs in Pakistan in particular and other Asian countries?
Thank you. The purpose of my citing examples of, that I did was really was in response to a specific issue of moving up the value chain. I do believe that the challenges in Asia are far, far greater. And right now, we are definitely looking at inclusive growth and poverty alleviation as our biggest challenge to be addressed. And that's where we look at SMEs as a very, very powerful engine of growth that requires to be supported in a full-throated way. So let me assure you that the bank's priorities are certainly among the poorest of the countries, and also we have a special Asian Development Fund that looks entirely into the needs of such countries. And also even among, most of our countries are actually within that sort of low income to middle income range. What I was talking about is the sort of long-term aspiration of countries eventually to move up from middle income to high income status. But I agree that before that's a long way, and right now we need to do, and I also mentioned, if you remember, that the first step is really for countries to get into production networks and what we call supply chain networks. It starts with national chains, then it goes into regional chains, and then goes into global chains, though I agree in case of the latter two, you can leapfrog into a global chain before you get into even a regional chain. So the entire purpose of our regional cooperation and integration strategy is to strengthen these networks, these production networks, supply distribution networks, so that the industrialization can and the structural transformation that takes place in many of these economies are linked to this sort of trend that is taking place.
Okay. One last question from the floor.
Well, certainly this has been a very interesting discussion because we have had the institutions, Asian Development Bank, we have had Islamic Development Banks, ITFC, we have had the Exim Bank, and then we have had also a bank, EcoBank. We have had the guarantee, we have had the audit mechanism. Now, I would like I represent the ITC here, and the ITC is keen to do more with small businesses to increase access to finance. And I would like to use the last few minutes of this session for our speakers and advisors to drive us towards an outcome. What an institution like the ITC, what is our role? It seems that the banks are doing their job. It seems like what is important for the producers is to have a buyer on hand before producing. But it also appears that there's a gap in information, that this risk mitigation topic that we are talking about can be alleviated if we take care of this gap in information with buyers, sellers, bankers, producers, guarantee individuals. And it seems that for institutions such as the ADB or the ITFC or the ITC, there's a role to fill this gap of information. I would like our colleagues to tell us what should be our first steps. How should we fill this gap so that we can leave with an outcome from this panel? Perhaps the ADB is already doing that. If Madam Lakshmi can tell us exactly on technical assistance what the ADB is doing and how the ITC can work with the ADB, how this knowledge can be transferred to Africa, which is really a continent of interest for us and our donors, would be grateful. Thank you.
Okay, Ms. Lakshmi, in terms of the concrete step that could be taken.
Just to respond, I can see the sort of quest for a positive and a concrete outcome from the discussions that have emerged, where, as you rightly said, there are some very important perspectives on the direction of, in which the SMEs and other players would like to proceed. I think to start with, we need to create many knowledge platforms where there are very, very, focused discussions in terms of the how of doing things. How do you do it there? How do we do it here? How do we see ourselves coming together in a way that is mutually beneficial? And as I mentioned in my address, one of the Asian Development Bank is now increasingly moving towards not being just a bank that provides financial support, but also knowledge support. And I dare say the frontiers of our knowledge support now will have to extend beyond our region, and a good way of doing this would be is the way in which we have now signed a memorandum of understanding with the African Development Bank, where we are engaging with each other in terms of how we mutually support our trade finance programs. So that's one knowledge platform for you. In addition, there are other forums where also this kind of work is going on. I have just come back from attending the World Bank IMF meetings, and in particular I had attended the meetings of the International Finance Corporation roundtable, which is really a platform where institutions working for the private sector are exchanging knowledge in terms of how to support, how to create jobs, how to make the SME a very powerful engine for creation of jobs and so on. So there are many such global platforms, and we need to periodically exchange knowledge. That's the first step. That's what I'd like to suggest.
Okay. Mr. Rene, you would like to add something?
Yeah, out I'd like to add that the ITC should facilitate linkages between financial institutions in emerging markets. Very, very simple things. If you try to transfer money today from Indonesia, for example, to Benin to buy cotton, what are you going to do? Anybody in the room, what are you going to do to transfer money from Indonesia to Benin? It's going to be a long process that will go through 2 or 3 correspondent banks in North America, Europe, before landing somewhere in Africa, in Benin. What I'm proposing is banks should establish relationships, basic SWIFT codes, keys, very fundamental basic things. We need to establish a relationship between ourselves and the South so that we can start pushing trade. Not even credit. It's not a question of credit. Some of these SMEs have their own money. They have their own resources. They just want to pay. They don't know how to pay. So we have to get it right before we start even thinking about financing. So institutions like ITC should facilitate the linkages between financial institutions in the South.
Any more additional ideas? Mr. Nurdali would like to ask.
Yes. Yes. I just want to add what my colleague Rene said. We are, at the end of the day, a trade finance institution. We don't create trade. The trade has to come from the people. The willingness, government to government, to create among themselves, what do you call it, market information. That's where institutions like ITFC have to facilitate this type of exchanges, right? Then we people like trade finance can come in to get the trade going, but we cannot create it. It's the business people who would make the trade, who then would need the support from the bank. And then people like bank like us need to find a model, the right model, to finance the emerging market business operators. That's why, as my colleague said earlier, slowly banks are moving away from a balance sheet finance to structured financing, where they look at the risk in a different way. This is how you can add value to the SMEs.
Okay.
But again, it's the trade. We cannot do the trade. It's come from the business operators between themselves.
Okay.
Thank you.
We are running out of time, but thank you very much to all of the speakers who have shared with us their valuable insights on the issue trade financing between emerging markets. And again, I would love to thank everyone on the floor for the questions and also for your attention to the discussion. And we hope to see you again in the next event. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. That was the plenary session. And to all speakers, thank you for your valuable lectures. And thank you, Ms. Frida Lidwina, moderator.